Okay, so let's get started. Welcome back. This is another sponsored stream by Microsoft Azure, and we're going to be looking at Playfab again. This is the third installment we're doing, and the first stream, what we did is set up a user interface to allow players to sign up and register for Playfab using an email address and password, and then they can log in with those two details. And we also set up a little page where if they forget their password, they can put in their email and Playfab will handle sending them an email. The following stream from that, we then logged in using those credentials, and we learned a little bit about what we could do with title data and player data, effectively using data on our Playfab server in order to either store information on players like high scores, or we could also store information like variables that we'd want to use in our gameplay. And an example we did of that was we had a spawner in our level, and we made that spawner retrieve how many enemies it should spawn from the Playfab server. And what that means is you can dynamically change that whilst your game is running, and it will impact any games that are running at that moment in time. It's instant. You don't need to redeploy, which is a great feature of this kind of cloud data integration with gaming. So that's what we looked at last time, but we really want to focus on how we can make the Playfab stuff that we've looked at already. How can we make that more accessible for game jams? We talked about the global game jam already that's coming up in January. I just hosted my own game jam last week, and Ludum Dare is a great game jam that happens twice a year as well. And so we talked about the benefits of if you're using a leaderboard in a game that you're putting forward to a game jam, it just gives that little bit of incentivization for people to play your game more than once. It also lets other people see that someone else has played this game and you maybe want to beat them, or you might invite your friends so that they could play it with you as well. So there's quite a good reason, in my opinion at least, for adding some leaderboard functionality, and you can kind of get it done pretty cheaply using Playfab without having to pay anything. And you can also just sign up in a web browser, and you're ready to go already. The Playfab API that you've got that has already been made in Unreal, so there's a Playfab SDK plugin. If you download that, it allows you to connect to the Playfab API super easily. If you only use Blueprint, you can just use the Blueprint calls. But if you use code, you can also use the code to write if you used to write in your logic in C++. So a lot of the kind of heavy lifting has been done for you, and we're going to utilize more of that today by having a look at how can we log into Playfab then without the user having to sign up. Can we make our Playfab title know about all the players, even if they don't want to give their email address, and create an account? And the good news is it's pretty straightforward, and you could use this, what we're going to learn today, you could use this in any project really. It's not tied to your project. You could just copy paste this code or import it into a different project, and then every project you have, you'd be able to kind of track how many people have played your games, or how many unique players, I guess, have played your games. And you can see when they last logged in, and you could utilize Playfab, as we've learned in previous videos, to do something like a high score leaderboard as well. So that's what we're planning to do today. So I've got myself open the project that we did last time, and just to remind ourselves, as I said, we made it so that it would give you a login screen. You could go onto like a create new account page, and you could sign up on this page as well. We did have if you're on the sign in page, you could forget your password and you could enter in your email address and get it sent to you, as I said. But generally speaking, you would log in. It would then send a message to the Playfab API saying, hey, here's the user details of someone who's trying to log in. And then it would authenticate it and send a message back saying, yeah, that is fine. And once we get that message back, we load the next level. So that's pretty much what we've gone ahead and done here. So it all works really fine, and really having someone sign up for an account is a great way to do it, and will suit a lot of games. But today, as I said, we're focusing on quicker games where maybe a player isn't going to want to sign up. It's a free game perhaps, or a game jam game. So instead of having this sign up process, we're going to go straight to just having an account made automatically for the player. And the player doesn't really know about it, and this isn't in a immoral, sneaky way as such. It's more of a case that they don't need to give any personal information in order to have an account for you. What we're going to do today is we're going to generate an account for them, make a random ID for them, and then we will just check, do they already have an account? If they do, well, then we don't make an account for them, and they just log in with that existing account. Again, the player doesn't need to know anything about this. We're going to save it into a save game file in Unreal. So that means whilst they're using the same computer, it will use that same account continually. So per kind of save file, which is typically going to be per PC, it will save that user's login account number, and it will try and log in with that in order to get into Playfab. So all of this will be done without the player really knowing about it. So the positive of this, the player doesn't have any barrier to playing your game. The negative, the player, you're not going to get any player specifics like their actual name. You're not going to get an email address if you wanted to be sending emails to your players. But for our needs today, I don't think that negative is worth worrying about. So let's have a look exactly what we're going to do then. So we're just going to go through the logic first. We'll code it out, and then at the end of the session, we'll have a bit of a chat about different ways that you could use this in order to, well, how you could maybe plug it into your game. Like, when should we run this code? When is a good time to run this code? So you may remember last time how our code looked. We had a Playfab game instance that we made. And this was responsible essentially for, if we bring this back up on the screen, these were functions that were going to get called whenever you clicked on the buttons on our user interface. So let me go ahead and open the user interface quickly, just so we can have a nice refresher and we know exactly where we are. So if I go to the sign up widget here, this was put onto our main widget, which is our Playfab login widget, I think. Login screen, was it this one? Yes. And we connected all of these in this blueprint. We effectively made each of those buttons call a function. So you can see it gets our game instance, it casts it to our custom Playfab game instance that we made, and then it calls the sign up function. And if I go back to my Playfab game instance here, we will see there's our sign up function, and we had similar ones for login and forgot password as well. So we used our game instance as our main kind of point at where we were connecting to Playfab or making API requests. Requests being asking for information or sending information to them as well. So yeah, we're going to do our logic in here then as a result. So let's think about how we're going to do this. For now, we'll focus on the logic. We don't need to worry about where we're calling this or when it's happening. We'll just do the code for it, and then we'll plug it in right at the start so we can see it working. So I'm going to make my own kind of custom event, which is just going to be housing all the logic that we're sorting out now. So the first thing that we want to do here is give this a meaningful name. So this will be try to log in user. Okay, so just make sure I don't have another function, anything like that. Yeah, we have our login. Maybe we should name this in a bit more of a meaningful way so we know this, like auto login user. Let's call it that. So we're implying that this is something that's automatic, like without the player having to think about it, okay? And what we'll do is right at the start of the game, we can go ahead and call that. So event init happens, it's kind of like you begin play almost of the game instance. You can think of it like that at least. And we're going to go ahead and call that auto login user like that. So if you remember, one thing we did right at the start was set our Playfab settings. This is where we give our game ID. Just in case we need some reminders. Give me just a moment. I'll open the developer side of Playfab now so we can just get a refresh of how that looked. Let's log into this. There we go. Okay, let me bring this across. So this was where we signed up last, where we had our dashboard in Playfab last time. So we have our two games. My game, that was the default one that was there, and we made this one called Shooting Gallery. And I have this development, it's currently in development, sorry, ignore that bit. But the ID on the right bit, there's two A6 that I've got. That's my custom one. You'll have your own one to put in. That is our game, our title ID. and you need that to be set. So there's two places to do that, if you remember. First off, we did it in this Playfab settings. We just made a local variable here. We put the value in there, and then we called set Playfab settings. The alternative way to do it, you can go to project settings. You can go down into your plugins. You need to enable the Playfab plugin first, of course. And you can go into Playfab, and you can set it up in this section as well if you wanted to. So there's two ways to do it. I'm just going over this in case someone's joining this video and they haven't seen this stream and they haven't seen the first or second ones, just so they're not completely unable to follow. Okay, so oh, hold on, I just realized that hold on. Yeah, I realized I wasn't showing you the right screen then when I was trying to show what I was meaning to show. Okay, apologies. So yeah, over here we have our set Playfab settings. This is where we would chuck in our code. So if you click on this variable here, you can see that I've got that code that was on my Playfab dashboard not long ago. So if I open this up, there's that same code. And I was just saying that you're also able to set it via the project settings. So if I go to edit project settings and you go down to your plugins and you'll find a Playfab section, you can also just chuck it into this section as well. So whichever one of those you want, but make sure that's done before you do any of your API requests. You want to make sure that the Playfab, it knows what title you're trying to work with, basically. Okay. So let's go back to our Playfab game instance. We've got this function called AutoLoginUser, and we're going to start actually doing something with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to call a function. Let's have a look at it. The name of the function that we're calling within the Playfab API is something called LoginWithCustomId. So what LoginWithCustomId allows you to do is just to provide a custom ID, a number or a string or whatever that you want to provide as your ID, and it'll just log in a player with that. There's no need to register or anything. Now, the typical problem with this is, say we did a username. If I signed up with the name Dan, it would make that would be my custom ID, so I could sign in with that. If someone else called Dan, and there's many of us in the world, created an account and wrote the word Dan in, then they'd be logging in with my account, because that was our custom ID if you want. So custom IDs need to be really something unique and something that other people aren't going to be able to guess or kind of exploit in that way. So that's something to keep in mind as we do this as well. A quick hello to people in chat as well. Merlin the Wizard, great to see you. It's Halsey, it's great to see you as well. So just a reminder, if anyone in chat today is another of the Microsoft Azure sponsored streams. Thank you, Merlin, for the link in chat. So this is just continuing our look at Playfab, and our focus today is to look at how can we really reduce the barriers for our players so that they don't have to create an account on Playfab in order for us to be able to record high scores and kind of track analytics on our players. And that really suits a game jam environment where players probably don't want to sign up just to play a game jam game. So that's what we're looking at today. It's great to have people here with us as well. Thank you for being here. Okay, so this auto login user, we want it to eventually log in with a custom ID, but we need to work out a way for us to provide a custom ID that is going to be unique so that two people playing aren't going to have the same login details essentially. So we'll come to that in a moment, but before we generate it, we also need to think, once we've generated that number, we need to store that on the player's PC so that next time they play, they have that number to go again. Because if we just generated a new number each time, it would act as if it's a new account every time I'm playing. So I log in once, it generates a random number for me to use as an ID, makes an account for me. Second time I log in, the same code runs again. So it'll make a new ID for me and it'll log me in with a separate ID. And it makes it hard for us to track our players' behavior then. And it'll also stop players from being able to have a high score associated with their account if every time they play the game, it's a different account. So we need to think about how we're going to make this login kind of persistent. Now, this isn't going to be perfect. And what I mean by that is if a player uninstalls the game and reinstalls the game, their account will effectively be inaccessible for them then, because their save game will have been deleted, and that's where we're going to store their ID. So that's something to consider. But if you were to integrate this system with the login system we did last time, you can merge accounts. So you're able to say, okay, turn this temporary account I've got now, I want to make this a proper account where the user can provide an email, a password, like we did before, and you can link those two accounts together then. So there's definitely an option for you to build on this. So it's definitely an option that I think is a really good starting place to explore. And then perhaps you can encourage your player to sign up for a full account. But yeah, so as I said, we're going to be storing this on the computer then. Partly Atomic brings up a good point. Typically when you install a game, the save games don't always go into a folder that will be deleted when you uninstall. Some installers will ask you, do you want to delete all save games and that? So you may have an option to keep the save games, and you can always manually copy them as well. I guess that's an option, but still it's something for us to consider, right? Okay, so we want to have a little look then at creating a save game first. And we can use Unreal's save game system, which means this is really no work for us. We don't have to fuss around with making a file, opening like a stream writer and reader and things like that in order to write to files onto a system. Like you typically write a file to a system, because Unreal's save object is an object that we make at runtime, and then we can save that and it'll effectively serialize it and store it on the computer for you. So next time you can try and load it from a specific place. If it finds it, it loads it, and then you can read the data that was in it. It's super simple to use as well. So that's what we're going to start at looking at today. So let's move this bit up nice and clear away from the rest, because we don't really need to concern ourselves with the rest for now. We are going to probably have a bit of a gap before we log in, because we've got to go ahead and make this save game to start with. So the first thing we're going to do then is we're going to think about the situation. Is it the first time they're logging in or not? So if it is the first time they're logging in, they're not going to have a save game. But if it isn't the first time they're logging in, they will already have a save game if they've gone through this logic that we're just about to code now. So let's start with creating a save game for them, shall we? So the function you want to call to begin with is create save game. You could have probably guessed that. So it's create save game object. And then you need to select a class of what you want your save game to be. And you can see there's some in here by default, but we're going to want to go ahead and make our own save game. And what making a save game means is you're making an object, but you can add variables to it, and that's the data you're going to save in this save game. So let's go ahead, let's go to our Content Explorer, Content Browser, sorry. And in here, I'm just going to go back into my main folder, and we're going to right click, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new blueprint. I managed to right click on a file there, so forgive me. I'm terrible at if there's no gap, I always struggle with this. It stresses me. I want to just right click in emptiness. There we go. I had to drag it up to do it, but that'll do. So we're going to create a new blueprint class, and this time we're going to try and derive it from the save game class. So if you don't see this immediately, you need to click the all classes to bring this down. Click save game, click select. And then from here, we're just going to call this our, let's just keep it in line with the rest of the project. We kind of call things Playfab, game instance, etc. So let's just call this Playfab save game, shall we? Okay, so I'm going to open that up. You can see it has nothing in here. And we don't really need to code anything. The only thing we want to think about here is this variable section. And this is where we can add anything we want to save in our save game. So we're going to save a couple of things that we care about. I think realistically, this ID that we're going to make, this custom ID that we're going to sign in with, that's the key thing we want to save. But there might be a couple of other things that become useful to save as well. So we'll have a look at, as we go along, at adding stuff in. But for now, what we're going to do is just add the one thing. So I'm going to go to variables. I'm going to add myself a string. So let's change this to a string type. And I'm going to give this a name over here. We're going to call it DisplayName. Actually, no, they're going to sign in with custom ID. Yeah, let's call it a user ID then. Okay, so we're just going to make a user ID. We're going to go ahead and compile that. We can add a display name as well. Let's do that now, because we'll end up coming back to do that later anyway. So we'll add it. We're going to call this one DisplayName. And there we go. We can compile, we can save. And if I'm honest with you, we can close that down because you're done. You've created this object that has two variables that we're going to use, and that's all we really care about. So, okay, let's go back to where we were then. So we're going back to our Playfab game instance, this auto login user function. We're going to create a save game object. We're assuming this is the first time they've logged in. And then what we need to do is to choose that save game class that we just made as our save game class. Ta-da, brilliant. And what that means is this return value coming out will be of that type now. So we can trust that we can use this. So yeah, the first step is to create the game save object. This is given a save game object, sorry. This is giving us now an object that we can write to those variables that we've made, and then we can call a separate function, save game to slot, and that will make that save game file for us. So let's have a little look at how we do those next two steps. So if we wanted to set a custom ID and a name, we'd do this sort of logic. So you drag off of it, you can call a function then, and we called it user ID, I think, right? So there you go, you can see we've got user ID. So you can just set data as simple as this, set user ID. So we're going to have to come up with some logic to make this a random number. For now, I'm just going to put 1337 in as a random number. After that, we're going to do the exact same thing for the display name. So let's just do set display name. There it comes. Plug that in, and our display name is going to be no name McGee. There we go. So that will create an object. We're then setting two variables on it, string members for user ID and display name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to save that. And that will create that save file for us. So next time the player logs in, we can actually check, does that save file exist? So let's continue with this then. So if we take this save object that we got from create save game, we can pull off of this, and we can get a function called save game to slot. I mentioned this earlier. So there's two functions you can call here, and it's important to think about what is the right one for you. There's an async one, and then there's a save game to slot without the word async at the start. So if you're new to this sort of terminology, async basically means you start it and then it'll call back after a while once it's finished. And then you can hook into a little event that says, hey, I'm finished, and define what logic needs to happen. So the good thing with async stuff is if it's going to take a while, it means that you're not hanging around and blocking your thread. You're processing, you're not blocking the processing in your game whilst you're waiting for something to happen. Now, as for the non-async version, the just plain default save game to slot, if you're not actually doing much, if it's a small save file and it's not in the middle of you playing a game where there's enemies flying around you and data could be changing as you go, it's perfectly fine to use. So we're going to be doing this kind of on like a title screen or right at the start of the game. And so for me, I think using the save game to slot is perfectly fine to do. They look very similar. Let's just show both of them so you can see that they are similar. You're not missing out on, if you want to do it the other way, it's not going to take that much more work to figure it out. Effectively, the difference you have is you can hook into this completed pin instead. So this first pin will execute immediately after this is called, but then this second pin gets called once it's finished saving the game. It'll call back to this and continue with the logic. It should be noted the save game and the success variables are only going to be valid for you after this completed node is called. So do not use them from this top pin because they're not going to be in a valid state at that point. Okay, so they look the same other than that though, really. So let's go ahead and just use this save game slot, as I said. We'll plug this into our next bit of logic. To make things a little bit cleaner as well, I think we're going to try and just move some of these wires down, just so we can have less crossing wires as we go forward. Okay. So this will do fine for that. Now those first two, and then I can just bring this one across here just to keep it a bit cleaner what's going into what. Okay, so this is now going to save it, and you can see that we've got two variables that it's asking for, or two kind of parameters to pass into this function. We need a slot name and then we need a user index. So slot name is effectively what is the name of this save file going to be. It's going to make a file, whatever you call it, .sav for sav for save, right? And so this is the name that you're effectively giving it. So since we need this in another part of our code, think about it. If we need to save it with a name, when we want to read from the save file, we need to know the name of the file as well. So instead of manually writing in like my save file, and user index is just so you can have multiple saves per like user, I believe. We're just going to stick to using one at the moment. So instead of just manually typing this in, what we're going to do is we're going to use a variable to make sure that it's consistent when we're writing to the save file and when we're reading from the save file. So just right click on these. You can then promote it to a variable. So we can just call this, it's called slot name. I'm just going to rename it, one, because it has spaces in the variable when you do that, and I don't like that. But I'm going to just call it save slot name. So it makes a bit more sense when we see this as a variable on the left side. Just so you're aware as well, if you're joining this tutorial and you weren't on the previous ones, the number of enemies key, these variables here, you don't need to worry about them. That was something we were doing on the last tutorial. So the only ones we've used so far here is you should probably have a game ID so you can set your Playfab settings. And then other than that, this save slot name is the first one we've made. So we're going to go ahead and make this, and then we will promote the user index as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's just call this our save user index. Bro. So we're going to compile so we can give some default values. I'm just going to put 1 as my first one rather than 0. I can't remember if this is user facing, but typically I'd imagine users are used to numbers starting on 1 rather than 0. So I'm going to go down that route. And then as for the save slot name, let's just call this, let's try and think of something that will stand out for us so we can look at the save file later. Let's just call this our Playfab login save. All right, we'll just call it that, Playfab login save. So we can use these again later now when we want to read from our save file. So what we want to do, I guess it would be sensible, we do have this return value to see whether or not it was successfully saved. Something could go wrong. I like to be safe with my coding, so we're just going to do a little branch and an error message just in case that goes wrong. So if it wasn't successful, we want to know about it, right? So we can change the code and fix the bug. So we're just going to print a message out. I'm going to do this super simple for now. You might have your own error logging system, so I don't want to take long on this. So unable to save game to slot. Let's just say that. Okay, bro. However, if it did work, then we're in a position where we could probably try and log them in. So we could go and plug into this login. So this is good so far. There's a couple of things that we need to address, and let's have a talk about those in just a second. ASMR drinking in your ear, sorry. Okay. So the two things that we need to address before we really dig into this login with custom ID part are the following. First off, we used a random number here. Well, it wasn't random. I just wrote in 1 through 37. All right, that's problem number 1. Remember, as I said, this needs to be a unique, different number. So we're going to look at generating a unique number now. And the second thing we need to think about is, at the moment, we're creating a save game no matter what. We want to check, do they already have a save game? Because if they do, we're going to load from it. So let's deal with those two problems. And they're quite straightforward to fix, which is nice. So the first easiest one to fix is this. We want to use a random ID for the player. Now, fortunately, there's a thing called a GUID, or GUID, it's spelled. And if these are effectively you can make a new one of these and it will generate a long random series of numbers and letters for you. And someone in my community, I think partly, was saying the other day that with certain types of GUIDs, they're not unique to like Unreal as a concept, but with some of these, the chances of 2 of these being generated the same are ridiculously small, that it's probably safe enough for you to just generate a GUID and use that as your unique identifier for Playfab. Now, you could always take extra precautions and append little suffixes to the end or the start of this as well. So let's have a look how this would work then. So if I drag off of this, well, actually, we're just going to right click and we want to create a GUID, I'm going to call them, okay? Rather than saying GUID all the time. So you'll see when we type in GUID, we are welcome to press this new GUID option. And there we go. It will just create one for us. Returns a new unique GUID. So it'll be unique within the runtime of this game session. It will not be within this one play session. It will make sure that it doesn't use the same one as well. But between sessions, you don't have that guarantee, but you almost have a guarantee due to the probability of it. Some of the GUIDs, I'm not too sure if the Unreal one does, but I also heard yesterday that some of them may use things like your MAC address as well as part of the kind of random generation here in order to kind of ensure that it's different, because every device that you use will have a different MAC address. No two devices in the world should have the same MAC address, and therefore that is some element of uniqueness as well. So if you were developing a game for Android or iOS or something like that, by the way, you could use this a function you can call, which is getDeviceID, and that will give you a similar kind of MAC address ID, I believe. I've tried that on PC, so I can show you the function, but it didn't actually do anything. So if I went into here, I went getDeviceID. So this looks promising because it says return the platform-specific unique device ID, but I tried printing this out and it just gives you nothing. It's an empty string. So yeah, that's not what we're going to be doing today. That's why we're using the GUID instead. We have Halsey in chat saying that the chances of two GUIDs being the same is 1 in, I can't even read the number. We're not in, hang on, there's millions, there's trillions. How do I say that number? It's 64 with 12 zeros after it. You can go ahead and do the correct mathematical labeling for that number. Halsey in chat asking, is there a get MAC address? No, there is not. So yeah, there is a chance though, Spacey. So as I said, it is worth being aware that there is always a chance. It's ridiculously small, but there is a chance, which is why realistically, for a game jam game, it's perfectly fine. For a small game with a very small player, with a relatively small player base, is perfectly fine. If your game's getting larger, you may want to opt to a more secure way, and you could always do something where you ask the Playfab server to generate you a random ID each time for a new person, and that makes sure that it's not going to be duplicated then, right? You're taking the responsibility away from the client machine, and instead you're putting it as server logic. But yeah, these are problems that we don't really want to think about today. Yeah. As Andre is saying in chat, so you probably don't want to guest ID on large games. Indeed. But it's interesting to think, as I said earlier, you can link accounts together. So if you start with this, and then you realize, oh, I want to change it to a login system, you can link people who started with this sort of account, and they could go ahead and make it into a proper login account, and you can prevent new accounts signing up with that old custom ID way. So that's all good. Dan can't count. Did I say? I got my numbers wrong by the looks of it, with whether I said trillion or whatever. Okay, so 1 in a billion chance for 103 trillion IDs. That was the other stat given. But anyway, okay, we're getting distracted. So yeah, what we're going to do then, we're going to make one of these new GUIDs, and because we want to store it as a string, because that's kind of what we need to send to Playfab, instead of adding a GUID to our save file that we're going to be storing, we're going to store it as a string. If we plug it straight in, it says it's not compatible with a string, but we can just go ahead and convert it. It's not a problem. So if we go drag off of this, I think this is a string like that, and then you can just plug it straight in. Normally when you plug straight in, these things resolve themselves, but with GUID you may need to do it yourself. So don't get put off if it says you can't do it when you drag in the first time. Okay, so that was the first of our problems. The fact that they're called No Name McGee, that's not a big problem because the player doesn't really need to have a name in it yet. If you're doing a leaderboard, you might want to give the player a chance to choose a name, but we'll skip over that for now, and we can talk about it a bit later. So our second problem, if you remember, was they may have already logged in, and at the moment we're just flat out creating an account for them. So let's go ahead and think about how can we manage the case if they've already logged in once. So we're going to use a similar function, similar to the create game and the save game, where there's a function in here called load game. So let's go ahead and type in load game, and you can see we've got an async load game and we've got a load game. The same argument applies to what I said earlier. If you think it's going to be a lot of data loading in from your file, or if it's in a real-time environment in your game where lots of other things are happening, it's probably best that you use the async one. But if you're on like a pause screen and you don't mind having a bit of a stutter, or you're on a title screen or it's on a loading section, then you could probably just get away with not using the async one. Okay, so what parameters do we need to give this? We need to give it a slot name and a user index. That's pretty handy because we've already got two variables of that name. If you remember, when we saved game to slot, we needed to provide the same too. And this is why we promoted them to variables. So now we can make sure that we're giving it the exact same slot name and the exact same user index as when we created it. So let's go ahead, we'll control drag these out, and then we'll plug these in. Okay, so we're saying save a game from the slot, and then we get a return value. Now we don't have anything saying was it successful, so we're gonna have to do our own little way of determining whether or not it was successful. So what I'm gonna do here is just check whether or not the object coming out is valid. Just make sure it doesn't return a null pointer for us. So we're gonna go into here. We're gonna drag off the return value. And then what we wanna do is check whether or not this is valid. So we say is valid, and there's two options. The first one returns a bool if it is, and then you need to branch to use it. The second one just does two in one for you. You don't need to add an extra branch there. So you can just plug that in and then carry on in this way if it is valid. Now, it's just been pointed out as well that there is a function you can call. Thank you, Andre, in chat for pointing this out. You can call a function does save game exist instead. So that might be a sensible way to do it as well. Does save game exist? You could go ahead and run that first, and then it just gives you a yes or no. And then if not, if so, then you would load the game. So that's an alternative way to do it. I mean, to be fair, let's do it that way because it seems like it's been designed to be created that way. So we're going to go ahead and do it that way. Thank you, Andre, in chat. And again, we can just reuse these nice local variables to make sure that the information is the same each time. So let's branch off of this. So does the game exist? If the save game does exist, then what we want to do is load it. And if it doesn't exist, that's where we're going to do this stuff that we did earlier. So let's bring this down a little, shall we? We'll bring this down. We'll probably tidy some of this up before we carry on. So let's just go ahead and whack this above there for now. Yeah, that looks fine. And let's space out these a bit because it's all a little bit tight at the moment. Okay. So if the save game exists, we're going to load from it. If not, we're going to go ahead and create the save game. This is the logic we made earlier. So that's all good. So we can just store that up there. Or down here, sorry. And then let's have a look. If we are loading the game, then what do we get? Well, we just get back a save game object. Now at the moment though, we haven't told it what type of save game it is. So it's going to be in our interest here to cast it so that we have access to the member variables. So if I go ahead and, for example, if I just promote this to a variable, you'll see the variable type is save game. And what that means is I'm not going to have access to these fields like user ID. If I type in user ID, I get nothing back for it. So we need to make sure that we're casting it to the type that we saved. So let's go ahead and we're going to cast to BP_playfab save game. Just like that. And now that we've got that, we could do what we want with it. Now, if for some reason this fails, we should probably know about it. This is only going to happen if you update your save game and maybe you're loading an old save game from an older version of the game that you might have been running on your machine. So you probably want to think about this and design a healthy solution to that problem. But for us, we're just going to print out a log error message out just so we can catch it if we come across that problem. So error, I just copied my last error message, and this is just going to be unable to cast to Playfab save game. That'll do me. Okay. However, if it is successful, then we can go ahead and use the save game. And if you think about it, that puts us exactly in the same spot as we were before. We've now got a save game. It will already have the user ID in it because we loaded it. And so we can probably just carry on now to the login in bit. So let's drag in this line across. And there we go. So let's add some comments to try and make sure we're understanding exactly what's happening. So first thing we've done here is we've just said, do they already have a save game? This section up here is just load existing save game. And then the section down at the bottom, let's go ahead and move some things up so we have a bit of space for our comments here. So drag these up. So this section down here is going to be create a new save game. Cool. So that's our logic thus far. So we're going to now think about how we want this next bit to work, where we actually log in the player. So we have some errors when I try and compile. The only reason for that is because we haven't finished getting the on success and the on failure off of this login with custom ID function that we added right at the start. So let's go ahead and do that, shall we? Now, if you were on the previous tutorials, you'll remember that we made a on failure function. Let me just go and find that for us. This on fail. And what this on fail function does is it will just strip out the error name, message, and details, chuck it into a string for us, and then print it out. Now, because we've made that already, and because all of the on failures come with the same signature, which has that error message detailed in it, we can just keep reusing this on fail message as an event whenever we have a fail condition. So the first thing we're going to do is handle this on failure. And because it already exists, instead of doing add custom event, we're going to actually write in create event. And this allows you to specify an event that's already been made. So here we go. Our on fail exists in here. So we'll click on that. That is good. And now we need to do our on success. So this is what happens if the request is successful. Let's just go and drag an empty node off of here. We'll add a custom event and we'll just call this on login with custom ID success. Okay, and we're not going to do any code off of that yet, because the first thing we should be thinking about is what does this function need in order to fail or succeed? We haven't provided it with any details yet. So if you haven't seen these before, the way that a lot of these Playfab requests work is you call a function, but you need to provide it with data when you call said function. So we're going to drag this node off and we're going to make, and then it'll give you the name of the request struct that you need to use. So this is going to be a client login with custom ID request, bro. And this is how you kind of find out what they need when you make a request. There's two ways to find it out. There's either like looking at these structs and understanding how they're built, or like we learned previously, you can go to the Playfab API website and you can search all of the different events and it tells you what it's expecting, what is it going to return. That isn't Unreal specific, that is just the general Playfab API that all different kind of game engines and other things are going to be interfacing with it via. Okay, so custom ID and create account. They're the two things that it's asking us here. So create account, if you hover over it, it basically just says, if there's not one already linked to this custom ID, do you want to create one? In this situation, yes, because if you remember by here, we've just created a save game ready for a new user. So we do want to go ahead and create an account for him if so. And then we need to plug in the custom ID. So it's at this point, we need to think, well, how do we get that custom ID? Well, we saved it, if you recall correctly. We saved it into something called our user ID on our save game file. And if we'd loaded it, it would just be part of that object already. So we can just simply access our save file. Oh, I may not have saved my save file with a meaningful name. I have not yet done that. Yeah, that would be useful because we want to refer to this save game a little later on. Yeah, so let's go ahead and do that. My mistake there. So at this point, we've used it. We've saved the slot, but we're also, I think it's going to be useful for us to cache this so we can use it later on instead of loading it each time we need it. So let's go ahead and can we just promote this to a variable? So if we promote it to a variable and we'll connect these wires in here. There we go. We just need to give it a meaningful name. So this is going to be, I guess we can just call this our save game, right? That kind of makes sense. You might have an old one if you followed along earlier. This new var was just when I created a default save game to show you that we needed to cast it earlier. So we can disregard that one. Let's delete that. Okay, great. So we have now cached this, and we should probably go ahead and cache it here. So we know that they've got the save game. We've cached it, and then what we want to do is just store it then so we can access it later. Instead of dragging this all the way across, we can just whack it in here so we can use it multiple times without dragging wires everywhere. So there we go. We've got these two setters which are just set in the save game, so we know by the time we get over here we have got access to that save game. So I'm just going to move these a little bit further across just so we're not we can follow the logic clearly. Okay, so over here then we now need to provide the custom ID, so we're going to drag control and drag the save game out, and then we want to access what we called our custom ID was the user ID, right? So let's get our user ID, and then we can just plug that in. So we're packing up this information ready to send off to Playfab, and then it's going to try and log in with that information. I can press compile now, and it's happy because I plugged these in, but at the moment it's not going to do anything. I mean, it will create an account, but it's not going to do anything afterwards. So let's go ahead and handle the on login with custom ID success. Now let's think what we want to do with this. And sometimes it's worthwhile to have a look at what you get back from it in order to think about that. So let me go ahead, drag off of this, and we can go ahead and break this down. And this will give you all of the information that Playfab is sending you back when this was a successful login with custom ID request. Okay, so out of this, you've got a bunch of stuff. You may not know what they all are. You can always look up the Playfab API to find out what they are. So let's go ahead and let's go to the Playfab API. Yeah, we've been here before. Just Playfab, if we just click here. And then you're able to search in here, yeah. Okay, so let me just drop a link to this in chat in case anyone else wants to have a look for it as well. But if it's docs.microsoft.com and then /enus/rest/API/Playfab. And then in here, you can go ahead and search for the certain bits that you're looking for. So what did we just have on the screen a moment ago? So this is a login with custom ID, right? So if we were to go back to here and we type in login with, is this the right place to look for it actually? I think I may have, yeah, I realize I probably didn't search in the right place. Let me just jump into this. That's looking through all of their API. Okay, sorry, I'm in the right place now. Apologies, I was in a slightly wrong bit. You can see it's in the Playfab API references, client authentication, login with custom ID. This gives you all the information about that login request you're making. You can see when you request it, we pass a Boolean and a custom ID in, right? That's the two things we're passing in. There's some other stuff in here. There's different ways for you to package that information up, but we don't really need to cover that right now. And then the response, this is what you get back. So this is if it's a fail. it'll come back in this structure. And if it's a success, it comes in as a login result. And if I click on this, it'll take you to that structure. You can see we've got entity token, info result payload, last login time. And if we jump into Unreal, you can see this is the exact same data we're getting back here. So that's all this kind of Playfab SDK does for you in a way, is make it a lot more accessible and processes all of the data that's been sent back and turns it into these nice blueprintable nodes that we can use. Okay, so what we are probably interested in here is our Playfab ID, because there's a certain function we're going to probably call later called GetAccountInfo. And in order to make that request, you either need to provide it with an email, and our users aren't signing up with an email, or a Playfab ID. And a Playfab ID is a unique ID Playfab makes for your players. Hello there, Hefu. Thank you very much for the subscription. It's great to see you. And the book snail, thank you for a good question. So were there any API calls needed before logging with custom ID, or is that the first API call you're doing in this flow? So just to recap, this is the first one I'm doing. I'm doing it this event in it. I realized I have two monitors up. The function call starts all the way back here. We have something called auto login user, and I'm literally just calling that right at the start of my game. So all I do is set my Playfab settings game ID. We should have done that already if you're following along before. But then after that, we're just calling that function. And I'll just to run you through the flow quickly. What I'm doing is I'm making a save game for my player so that I can store this random custom ID that I'm generating for my players locally on the machine. Okay, so it basically says, do they already have a save game? If they don't, it makes a new one for them. If they do, it loads the save game. What I've done is I've made a new GUID, which is a randomly generated number here, right? So this is going to be used as your kind of custom ID that we're signing in with. Remember, with custom ID, you literally just provide an ID when you're trying to sign in. So if I made an ID 1234, that's bad because anyone else could make that ID and log in with it. There's no authentication past the custom ID. There's no passwords, for example. So that's why we want to make sure that we're generating something super random for them and that they can retrieve it sometime next time they launch the game. Okay, so after we make that save, then our first API call, as you asked, Booksnell, is this login with custom ID, and we're just retrieving it from our either loaded or newly created save game. We're loading that in, and then we can pass that as a parameter for our login with custom ID. So hopefully that catches you up to speed, Booksnell. Things are going great. Thank you very much for Hefu. I very much appreciate the subscription. It's great to have you here as well. So for anyone who's just joining, I am doing a third installment of my Playfab series. This is a sponsored stream by Microsoft Azure as well. If you're interested in any of the components that make up the Microsoft game stack, you can learn more about it on that link. Visual Studio is a tool that's part of the Microsoft game stack. We've done some tutorials on that before about using it with Unreal Engine. All the shortcuts and the little debugging kind of features that it gives you. And the last 3 times we've done this, including this one, we're looking at Playfab, which is essentially a really powerful backend, which you can use for free. There's also paid tiers, as if your game is big, you'd probably want to be having a paid kind of product to support that. But to try it out and to learn, and for smaller games, you can use it perfectly fine on the free tier. And it's essentially a backend that allows you to have information about your game that your live game can read while it's running. So you could have a variable that is how many enemies should spawn in a level. And you might set that on a Playfab server, a web server, and your game will retrieve it from that. And that means that your game can dynamically read changing data and it can impact running games without having to redeploy that game. So you can do that. You can also store information on players. So it makes an account when they log in. You can see when they last logged in, how many times they've logged in. You can create player information then specific to those. You could use this for high scores. You can use this for in-game currency. It does support things like in-app purchases if that's something you're interested in. And you can also use their servers for multiplayer game matchmaking and server hosting as well. So there's a bunch of stuff that Playfab encapsulates. That is like the whole backend service. We're mainly looking at it from like a user statistics point of view and how you can utilize that for a scoreboard in Unreal Engine at the moment. All right, so let us continue. So we just made this login with custom ID request. We passed it the custom ID we've loaded from our save file, or we created for our new save file. And then we were just looking at this, the result we get back if it's successful, gives us a bunch of data. But a little bit later, we are going to be wanting to call a function that requires this Playfab ID. So for now, I'm going to save that so that we've got it later. All right. So if you think of it this way, because we're providing making a custom ID for our user, they're not providing an email address, and they don't properly have like an account name either. They just have this custom ID that's being used. So using the Playfab ID is our kind of Playfab unique identifier that we're getting, that we can use when we make certain types of requests to the Playfab API later. So let's go ahead. We're going to promote this to a variable. Let's drag this across. Okay, and at the moment I've just called it's called Playfab ID. I think that's probably fine. I'm just going to get rid of the spaces. I wrote Playdab again. I think I did that last time. Makes me sad. Playfab ID, we've jotted in there, so that's fine. Okay, so we've got our Playfab ID, and then we need to now think like, what do you actually want to happen next? So at this point, they've logged in. They've got an account. And we could test it at this point if we wanted and just see, does a new account get created? But I'm going to go ahead and finish off the logic before we go and test it while our head is kind of in the code rather than taking us out of it. So we've got one other thing that's kind of interest here. So create newly created. So this says it's true if the account was newly created on the login. So do you remember we had the this little tick box earlier, create account? So this tick box here was saying if it doesn't exist, make it. This then is giving us access to that. So we're going to go ahead and branch off of this. And this is going to give us a way to figure out, well, is it a new account for the individual or not? And what we want to do is perhaps give them a username, because at this point, they're not going to have a username. Now, you might want to, this is really up to you how you want to design this flow. You might have your game pop up, and before running any of this code, it just says, what is your name? I write in Dan, press enter, and then it runs this code. You could do that. Remember, usernames don't need to be unique. So this can just be anything they identify with, right? So it really depends how your flow kind of is in your game, how you want to run this. But I'm just going to show you how you would update their user ID if you've done something along those lines. So if it was the first time that they're logging in with those details, therefore it created an account for them, what we're going to go ahead and do is we can call a function called user title display name. We want to update that. So if we just type in user title display name, like so. Let me just do that one more time as well, because a few results come up. And I just want to make sure you know that you're writing the right one in. And I think I did the wrong one there, actually. I'm glad I checked. So you can see in that list, you've got account management within admin, and then you've got a client section as well. And if you remember from the previous streams, we are doing client authoritative stuff here. We're kind of making requests from the client, not the server. And so we want to make sure that we are trying to call this client version of it. If you try and call the server or admin versions of these functions whilst you're on a client, it's not going to work for you. It actually, I think it throws an error if you go ahead and do so. So let's go ahead and choose the right function here. So we want to go into the client, update user title display name. So you might be thinking like, why is it called update user title display name rather than just like update display name? And the reason for this is on Playfab, per individual, you can have multiple titles. So if you remember the way that Playfab is structured, you actually have studio and titles. So Honest Dan Games is my studio, and then I've got various games in here, right? So a player might have different accounts for multiple titles that your studio runs. And that's the idea here, right? So if I go to my players and we go ahead and search, so I could click on one of these, and then in here you can see this is all of the information on them, and this is where all of the information that you're storing from multiple for this particular title, is going to be stored. So because we're in shooting gallery, so you can have accounts which are associated with your studio, and you can have accounts which are associated with per title as well. So that's what I'm trying to get at here, I guess. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we want to go ahead and set their user title. If it's the first time they've logged in, we want to give them a display name. And if you remember, we made this name over here. So let's give it a different name. I think I've done no name McGee when I was running through this yesterday. So let's just call this, can I get a name in chat, please, for our default username? For someone who hasn't chosen a username in a game, what should their username be? Okay, we have some suggestions here. Has name McGuff. Spacey 3D, I don't think that's a sensible one, partly. Rando Calrissian, definitely not Steve, and Defaulto. All right, well, I'm going to choose one out of those. I'm going to actually choose, I think what we'll choose is, let's choose Defaulto, shall we? Yeah, let's choose Defaulto. Beautiful name. It's because it's the default name, right? Okay, so we gave him a name of Defaulto earlier. So yeah, we want to make a request in order to tell the server. Remember, we've only created that. If this was just their first time logging in ever, we created a save game. We gave them manually a name called Defaulto. And now the server doesn't know anything about that. That save game stuff is purely local on our client. So we need to go ahead and tell the server, hey, this is what their username is. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. You can see same pattern as before. We have a request that we can kind of break off and figure out what information it needs in order for us to kind of make this request. So we're going to pull the request out, and then I'm going to choose the make client update user title display name request. That's a mouthful. Okay, so what is this asking for us? So display name is what they want. So you just need to provide a display name of what you want it to be updated with, right? Because they've already, at this point, if you remember, we've already logged in. So we are just gonna give that display name. So we need to, where is it stored? If you remember, it's in our save game. Remember whether or not they loaded it or if they created it, we say we stored this save game as a member. So we can get our save game and we can get the display name. And then we can just plug this in like so. So this will let us write this display name. Well, it'll make a request at least. And then we're going to get our, if it's successful or if it's failure, as always. So I'm going to do the same as I did last time. We're going to create an event here, and we're going to choose the one that is our on fail that we've used for all the other ones instead of reinventing the wheel. And then for the on success one, we're just going to go ahead and add a new custom event, and we're going to give this a name of on update user title display name success. Okay, so we now have if this worked, what should we do? So let's think, what should we do? I don't know if we actually need to do anything with it. If you're curious, you can do as I've said before. You can drag this out. Oops, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. You can drag this out and you can break it, and you can see what we get out of it. All right, so it just tells us the display name back. So for me, really, that's not giving me anything that I'm particularly interested in. You do have a request that you could look at what that is actually includes if you want. But for me, from my research I've done into it as well, we don't really have to do much more from that. So effectively what we can do is just think, okay, well, now that we've updated the name, let's carry on. And this is probably going to hook up to the same spot that this false would have gone to before. So if you remember, this condition here was an account newly created. If it was newly created, we went and updated their username. If not, we just want to carry on with our flow. And what we're going to do as our final step then is just to go ahead and we're going to get the account info for the user who's just signed in now using that Playfab ID. And that's going to give us just a way for us to retrieve the display name from the server. We should already have that, but we'll just get that down, and then we'll get something called the player ID as well, which is different. The player ID isn't the same as our custom ID that we signed in with. So when we create an account, it will provide us with this player ID. And so we'll get that. I'll print it out to the screen so you can see it. And then it's up to you how you'd want to use that logic afterwards. So let's go ahead and get this done then on screen, shall we? So if I move this across, just because we got a branch statement back here, I want to make it a little bit clear what's going on. So I'm just going to chuck a reroute down here for now. So reroute node, just so we can get this bit tidied up. Like so. And we want this to meet up with it. So they both go to that same point at the end of this. And so, yeah, what I said we wanted to do then was to go ahead and call something called GetAccountInfo. So let's go ahead and look at that. So GetAccountInfo, and you can see there's only options under client here, so we're safe to use these. So GetAccountInfo is what we want to use. And we're going to go for the exact same drill as before. We're going to go and drag off this request, and then we're going to make one. And that lets us see what it needs in order to get this account info. So this is what I earlier mentioned to you, is that we have something called a Playfab ID that we got back when we logged in. Now that Playfab ID is one of the things you can provide here. So if you hover over this, you can see it says user email for the account to find, because we're gonna look up an account with this function, and it's going to get us the account info back. Or alternatively, you don't have to provide both of them, you see. You can give a unique Playfab identifier of the user who we are currently trying to find. Now, because we've already logged in, we've got that. And because our style of doing this right now isn't signing up with the user email, this is what we're going to do. So we stored it earlier, if you remember, into a member variable here, Playfab ID. So that means I can just drag it off of my variable list, and we can just plug this in, which is quite straightforward for us, right? Then we're going to follow the same suit as always. Our on failure, we're just going to create an event here. Create an event, we're going to set it to be our on fail event. And then we are going to do our on success as well. If you see me, I'm staring at this screen when I'm coding because remember last time we were doing these tutorials, Unreal was doing this thing where on my screen it doesn't show. That's happening again. I can't see tooltips. Unfortunately. So anytime there's like some UI pop up at the moment, I can't see what it says, but I can see it on my stream overlay. So I'm kind of like looking at my stream in order to see what my pop-ups are saying. Okay, so on success, what's the name of this function? GetAccountInfo. So I like to call them, let's add custom event first, and then I like to call them the exact same, but just with on GetAccountInfo success. There we go. And then we're going to go ahead and break down this result in order to understand what we can get out of it. So let's drag it as we've done before, and we break it. And a little bit of a shame here, if you're just trying to use Blueprint, is this actually comes as an account info object, and it's not just a typical Unreal object. This is a JSON object. So what that means is there's a bunch of values in there that you could retrieve if you know the name of it. For example, if it had a thing called age, which was a number, you can get a field as a number and you provide it the key age, and then it'll give you the value back. If there was first name, which was get a value as a string, you'd give it the term first name and it would return to you Dan, or whatever the user's first name is. But we need to know what that is. And we can't just break it down because it isn't this is just a JSON object. The point of JSON is it's very generic. It's up to you how you fill out the key pair values inside of it. So for us to know what the key pair values are, we need to go ahead and have a look at the API document that I showed you earlier. So let's have a look what this is called. So this is our GetAccountInfo. So let's go ahead and type that in, shall we? So GetAccountInfo. Do I need to put spaces in there? Get account. Yeah, there we go. There's spaces in it. My mistake. So we're going to click on this, and you can see it takes us to that request. So we've already made the request. We provided our Playfab ID here. You see the tooltips we're getting in Unreal is the same stuff we got here, really. And then the responses is this result. And then if we look at the result, you can see we've got something called account info, which matches exactly with what we found here. Account info, right? So let's have a look what's in there. So the account info has all of these different things in here that we can pull out of this if we're interested in doing so. So I'm trying to see if there's any ones that are particularly interesting to us. So there's title info one here. This is title specific information for the user account. Remember how I said user accounts can have information per title that your studio has. So we want to, this is allowing us to get hold of that title info as a separate struct. So if I click on this, you can see within that, it then gives you their display name, their first and last login for that particular title there, right? So let's go back and let's start converting this into some of our code. So let's get this title info as a first starting point, shall we? So if I go into Unreal, and the way that we access these, as I said, because it's JSON, we can't just get it by name in a nice way. We instead need to use some of these JSON functions. So if I do get field, does it show all of them for us? Yeah, you can see the different ones. You have like number fields, object fields, bool fields and stuff. So because we are accessing, this is a separate kind of object. It's not like a flat type like this, like a string or like an array that we're getting off. We are going to cast it to an object. Or, well, not cast it, we're going to read it as an object. That's probably a better way to word it. So if I go get object field, and what we need to do is to provide the name of that field. And we only know that name because we've gone to the API here. So let's go to the API. We have a look. It's called title info. Okay, so let's get the information on this now, shall we? Let's, I'm just going to paste that in, title info, to make sure I don't get the name wrong. Great. So I've gone ahead and I've got this title info, and from that we can get extra things such as their username, or we might want to get something about the actual player account as well and get more information and drill down into it. So let's have a look what's inside of that, shall we? So in here, if we go into this, you can see we've got title player account. So this is the title player account entity for this user. Okay, cool. So this is going to give us more information about it. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and drag that off. So let's copy the name of this, title player account. Okay, and we'll go back into Unreal. So from this, we've gotten this object from our JSON account info. This is now going to be another one. So we need to go ahead and call, again, get object field. The name of this one, as we just found out, was title player account. And let's see what does that give us. So there's a bit of back and forth on these ones, but it's well documented. So as long as you're following through the documentation, you can just use it quite adequately. So in here then, entity key, let's go and have a look. And an entity key has an ID and a type. So this is the unique ID of the entity. The entity here is the player, the kind of entry in your player database, if you think of it that way, I guess. So we're going to go ahead and probably get that ID out. So it's just known as ID. So if we go back to our project, from here now, we can go ahead and get a string field. and type in ID. I copied too much of that line in, so let's just type in ID. There's only 2 letters. Hopefully we can't get it wrong. Let's make sure we got the capitalization correctly on it. So we go back into here. It was capital I, lowercase d, great. And you can see it's a string type. That's how I knew to call that function get string field. So that's going to give us our player ID. And essentially all of this information I'm pulling out now, you don't definitely need all of it. You'll find that some of this information you will want either to display to the player, or some of this information you want for future API requests that you're going to make. And you might want to store it so that you can use it without having to retrieve it all later, right? Because we've got this information now. After they've logged in, we've got this information. We're making an API request. So it kind of makes sense for us to kind of store this so we don't have to make repeated API requests. Because this information, a lot of it, we're not dealing with scores and stuff right now, right? We're dealing with account stuff. And this is likely to be static throughout your session. So if we get it once, we can cache it and use it whenever we need to. So let's go and have a look at how we would go ahead and use this. So let's just promote this to be a variable. And we can give this a name then. So this is just going to be our player ID. Let's go ahead and save that. So this has an execution pin in it. So this is going to be the first thing that we actually execute. All of this has just been retrieving and processing the information we got out of the request. So that'd be one thing from it. And if you wanted to verify that the username was set, or you could retrieve the username, for example, or even if you didn't do this first step, and we wanted to get their username out of it for various reasons, just to show a different example of that. The username is accessible via this title info. Let's just go and have a look in the API to understand that. So within the user title info, there's a thing in here called DisplayName, the name of the user as is displayed in game. Cool. So we can go ahead and read that information out if we want. So let's go and show how we do that. It's just a string. So you could go ahead and you can just, from this, we can just do get string field, and we can write in, was it display name? I think it was display name. Yeah, display name. And then like we've done with this, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and cache this, promote it to variable like so. There it is. This can go, I guess it can go before or after. Probably the wires would look nicer if I do it first. So let's just do it this way. Let's give it a meaningful name. So this was the display name of the player, right? Great. Okay, cool. We already do have that in our save file. We could, if you wanted, you could save this to your save file if you were retrieving it for that reason. But the important thing now is really we've got the choice to go ahead and use that information however you want to do in your game then. So we're going to just do one thing then to finish, which is just amalgamate or collect that information so that we can print it out to the screen to see what's actually happening. So we're going to go ahead and do a print string. And we're going to make, well, first off, let's make this show up on screen for a while so we can look at it. Let's make it, what's going to be a nice color on the background I got. I don't think there's a good answer to this, pink. And we're going to turn this into an append node just so we can go ahead and add a bunch of pins to this. Hefu, your question there, yes. So they may use them, chop them up and put them into like small videos on their own channel. But also I have permission to put them on my own YouTube as well. So yeah, the first two are on my YouTube, and this one will go up as well in a short while afterwards. I was using the VODs, but I've started putting all of my streams are now up on my YouTube channel. So yeah, any of my like game dev interview streams I do, or the feedback streams, or the game jam streams, or streams like this tutorial based ones, I now upload to the YouTube so people can kind of catch it whenever they want. Because I'm not streaming as often, I do like one or two a week now. It makes it a lot more feasible to kind of upload my content to YouTube. So yeah, if anyone's interested in the content, do feel free to follow the channel there, or subscribe to it as it's called on YouTube. Anyway, okay, right, so let's go ahead and print this out, shall we? So we're going to go ahead and do like 3 pairs of data. So this is just going to say our user login summary. The first thing we want to do is just show the player ID. And so let's go ahead and get that player ID we made earlier. Oops, plugged it into the wrong one. Control Z to undo. The next one we want to probably display would be the display name. Like so. And this will give us a way to make sure that new users, when we create a new user, that we did actually update their title display name correctly. Remember, we called them defaulto, so this should hopefully print defaulto. So let's go ahead and get their display name. And then I guess we have the Playfab ID as well, don't we? Oops. Playfab ID. And then we can just plug in that as well, just so we can see what kind of data we're getting out of this. So there we go. Okay, so we've got this. I should probably tidy this up a little bit, just so like put some spacing in. So we'll just put a comma and a space after them, and a colon and a space at the end of them. Get a space at the end of this, and then we'll just get a same comma space and a colon space there. Okay, just so it looks a bit nicer for us. And then we'll print that to the screen, and then we're done. At this point, I'm trying to think, would we want to save our game again? Has anything changed? Realistically, I don't think we need to save our game. You would probably save your game at certain intervals anyway, like when a level is closed, you might want to save to the game, or when you get to a checkpoint, you want to save the game. So this information should probably be available then anyway. So you could go ahead and save your game again if you want, or do some logic, but for now, we're not going to bother. Oh, yes, Andre, that's a very good point. I forgot that existed. Yeah, if you treat them as text instead, you can go ahead and do these sort of append statements in a much nicer way, can't you? What's it called? Is it format text? So if you do it like this, and then don't you pin things in? Oh, yeah, sorry, I can't see because actually, it may not be this one. No, I might be wrong. Do you remind me what the format text node is called? But it's one of those where you put the... yes, yeah, okay. I was on the right one, yeah. So I could say like, my name is, and then you do curly bracer Dan, close curly bracer, and it makes that pin for you, which is super handy. So this is basically how it's done in code. Where you do this kind of string. Oh, what's it called? When you add it in, it's not concatenation. It's there's a term for it anyway, where you basically replace the curly braces with the parameters that you provide afterwards. So yeah, this is definitely a nice way to do it. Thank you, Andre. I'd seen it before, but I'd forgotten, if I'm honest with you. Heifer, you got to rush. You have a good one. Thanks for hanging out. Really nice to see you in stream. I hope you keep him well. Okay, back to this though. Okay, so we should be all good now. And then after this, you'd probably want to call a function just to say like, hey, I finished logging in. So other parts of your game can hook into this and then maybe load a level. Or maybe at this point, you might want to just do like a load level. Or is it open level? I always forget the level. Open level by name. Or there's an object reference one as well, isn't there? Which lets you just choose it by name there. So you can do whatever you want after this. I'll leave it up to you to decide. But, okay, our logic is pretty much done. So let's go ahead and see what happens with this. Let's run through it again, what we expect to happen. So at the start of the game, this is in our Playfab game instance. It's going to go ahead and call auto login user, which is the function that we've defined up top. So first off, it says, do they have a save game? If they don't, it'll create one for them. it makes a random GUID for them. Well, that's what a GUID is. It creates a GUID and uses that as their user ID. And it gives them a default name of Defaulto. Thank you for Gillock for that name earlier. Then what we do is we cache that save game that we've just created. It's just an object with a couple of variables that we're storing. Then we call save game to slot on that save game. This is the process that creates the save game and stores it as a file, a .sav file on your disk. After that, we go ahead, make sure that it was successful, and we get up to this bit of logic. And this is what would have flown through if they already had a save game. It just loads it and stores it in that same save game variable. So by the time we get over here, we try and log in with the custom ID. The custom ID is going to be that GUID that had been made that we'd stored in a member called user ID on our save game. We tell it that we want to create a new account if it doesn't exist already. So when we log in with that custom ID, it will succeed. And we did a bit of logic here to see if it did create a new account for them, i.e. if they didn't have an account that existed, then what we want to do is give them that username on the server. Think, the server doesn't know about this variable over here called Defaulto. So we need to give it that information. That was just created in Unreal Engine if it's a new save game being created. So if it was a new one, we go ahead and we call a function called update user title display name. So we can update the display name for that user on this particular title. All right, so after that, or if they weren't a new user, they come down to this bit where we get the account information. I was just giving you an example of how you could pull out different information about your user that you may want to use in different parts of your game or cache for later use. So you can see that we called something called GetAccountInfo using a Playfab ID that we got back earlier from our login result. And then that allowed us to pull out a bunch of information, and we used the Playfab API here to help us understand all the information that we're getting back with that API call. We stored these, and then we're just going ahead and we're printing it all out onto screen. And what this is going to allow us to do is have a game where a player starts a game and it'll automatically create an account or log them in without the player knowing about it. And we can track that then. So before we run it, let's go and have a look at our account, shall we? We'll go to players, and we've currently got 3 players total. Okay, good. So now we can see if this is actually going to work for us, right? So where should we test it? So I'm in this level here. This was, let me get this on the right screen for you. I'm on this level here at the moment, which is my login screen. So it's going to be a little bit confusing because when I launch this initially, it's going to show like the login screen like we saw before. And I don't want people to be confused thinking I'm logging in now for this to work. So what we're going to go ahead and do, let me just save everything as well. I'm going to go to the level blueprint, and we're going to go into the begin play function, and I'm going to just get rid of this bit. This is the bit that was adding the login widget to the screen because we no longer need to log in with that, right? So, okay, so hopefully now when I press play, we're not going to see that much. I give you that heads up. But we can look through the logs and we can see what is happening with it. And we can check on our Playfab server whether a new user was created. And we can check locally to see if the save file was made. So let's go ahead and do that. So I press play. Do we get any warning errors? No, here we go. We've got a login ID, a login user summary with the player ID, the display name, and the Playfab ID displayed on the screen. Excellent. That's pretty cool. So it's pretty hard for you to see, I'd imagine, at that size. So what I can do is I can just go ahead and get Notepad open. I can copy that line of text into Notepad so you can go ahead and see it. So this was summary. Let me just look in here. We'll do a search for summary. Here we go. Let's copy this line in. And then we'll open Notepad, whack this in. So this is what we got out of it. So it said login summary, and then we had our player ID, we had our display name, and it had our Playfab ID written up like that. Excellent. Now, neither of these is our custom ID, by the way. Our custom ID that we're logging in with is different. And I should probably, we can print that out to see later. So let's stop and do a quick adjustment then to that. But first, before we do that, let's have a look to see, did it actually create an account for us? And let's see where that save file is as well, like I said. So first off, let's go into Playfab. Let's refresh our page. It says we've got 3 players. I expected 4. Oh, we do have 4. Defaulto. This 3-player thing didn't update, I'm guessing here. So there we go. We've got this defaulto. This is me. I logged in. It's 2 minutes ago. Correct. So we actually got to this stage without the user having to even know that it happened. I literally just pressed play in my game. If we go to my game, I'm just in a level. You know, they haven't got a clue what was going on once I've done that. So that's good. It did add a user account for them. The second thing is, where's that save file? So let's go and have a look. So if I was to go into the folder where my project is, so if I go into my dev folder, I'm going to go into Unreal, and this project is, it's a good question, where is this project? Let me just remind myself where this is. Is it in learning? I hope it is. Yes. Okay. So I think I've got 2 projects here. I need to work out which one is this one. Okay. So once you're in your project folder, you will have a folder called saved. And in there, you'll have a folder called saved games if you've got a save game. We go into that. You can now see this file called Playfab login save. So this save file, this .sav file, is what is your file gets written. Sorry, your save object gets written to this file, and it'll be read from this file as well. And the name of it, this Playfab login save, if you remember earlier, we gave it a name, didn't we? So when we created it, and also when we loaded from it, we had to give it a slot name, right? And I gave it Playfab login save as a slot name here. That's why it's called that. And it's important that we use the same one when reading or writing from it. Otherwise, it's going to think, oh, I don't have a save file, and it'll make a new one. So, okay, we've learned about that. Let's go and see what happens. Let's do a little change so we know which branch is kind of coming into. And also, I'm interested in knowing what this GUID is as well. So once we've set this user ID here, it'd probably be good to maybe just print this out. So let's just, this is when we make a new user, when we have to create a new save file, sorry, we're going to print this out just so we're aware of it. So let me just change this to an append quickly so it's a little bit cleaner for us. We'll take the user ID. We're just going to say new save user ID equals, and then it'll print that out for us. So let's hook these up. I know it's a little bit messy now, but let's not rearrange everything. I'm sure you can work out what I've done there. It's not too much of a mess. If anything, it's mildly symmetrical, which is pleasing. So, okay, so we've gone ahead and done that. And then we'll do it up here as well. So Andre in chat saying you should be able to see the custom ID on Playfab. Yes, I will show people where that custom ID is as well. It is on the page, so I will show that. The only thing is, it also shows my town location of where I live when I log in, and I don't want to show that on stream. So I'll get it off screen and then I'll bring it back up for you. But thank you for reminding me, Andre. I did mean to show that. So let's print it out from here as well. So if they do have a login, then what we can do is after we saved it, we can go ahead and, if you remember, we're saving it as user ID. So we just need to go ahead and drag this off and say get user ID, like so, and then we can just print it off. We could probably done this later down the line as well, but humor me, this is fine. So we're going to go and just print this off. So let's plug that into there, and then we can get this back plugged into where it was. And this is going to be new save. So existing save, we'll change this text to say existing save, user ID was that. Excellent. Indeed, Halsey, redacted. And indeed, Pomo, indeed. So it is a sponsored stream by Microsoft Azure. So if you want to know more about Playfab that I'm using now, or any of the Microsoft Game Stack, you are welcome to find out more on that link, or ask me about it as well. I'll happy to share what I know. Okay, so we're just making it so it tells us what our client ID is here. That's all I added in since. So let's think, what's going to happen if I press play again now? What should happen is it should go ahead and say, hey, they do have a save file, and so it should load the save file, and it should print the user ID, and then it will log in, and it will print out the summary of all the information. So let's go ahead and do that. What we don't want is a new account to be created each time the player logs in. That would almost defy a lot of the point of what we're trying to achieve here. So let's press play. It gives us our user ID, and let's copy this message out, shall we? Oh, we don't properly have to. I can see it's identical here, but it might be a bit small on stream. But these, you can see I've logged in, and it's got the exact same information again. My name is Defaulto. My Playfab ID is the same. My login ID, my player ID is the same. So that kind of proves to us that we are logging in with the same account. We're not getting this a new account created each time that we log in. And if I search for the, we should find in the search log something that says existing save. There we go, existing save. And then you can see this is the GUID that we made earlier, this random ID. So yeah, this is that random kind of generated series of numbers and letters that we were saying is so unlikely to be duplicated when creating one, that you can kind of assume that it's safe to use this for your players. But remember, as I said, if you really wanted to, you could always append a little string to the start of that. If your game was called Super Dan, then you might want to put like SD and then that character, for that string, for example, just to make it a bit different. But for me personally, for a small scope game, I think this is perfectly adequate. Okay, so we've logged in. Let's just verify now on Playfab. Do we have a fifth person? We shouldn't have a fifth person now. We're still on 4 people, which is good. 4 players total is updated. And if I search, it shows me the 4 players here. Excellent. Let's have a look at where this information shows on Playfab then. So let me open up this Defaulto account. And let me just go ahead and show some of the stuff that's on there. Okay, so this is the title page. This is where we can see that they have the display name that we set from code. When you create a new account, remember I said if we've just added a new account, then we need to tell the server that their name is Defaulto. It puts it in there. You could, as I said, you can ask the player for their username right at the start of the game, and you could use that instead to give it a bit more of a feel. So when they maybe get a high score in your game, they don't need to write their name in then. It's up to you how you do it. So this gives us information about those. And then if I was to scroll down to the bottom, let's have a look what we've got in here. So on the bottom of this section, this is where we've got our master player account information. And you can see this is the custom ID that I had printed in Unreal not too long ago. If I went back into here, this ID here, 6CEFB. That's the start of it at least. 6CEFB. So this is that custom ID that we used to create an account with. But you'll notice that is different to their player ID. So the player ID is this shorter thing that is automatically generated by Playfab when it is created. So you do have access to that as well. The final thing, I've alluded to it once or twice already, but just to point out, you can link accounts. So if you do start this way and you want to change it so that people have to sign up with an email, or you put some functionality in your game to make it so that they can have a permanent account, then that would be the way that you do that, is that you'd link the custom ID account with a email account or a Steam account or a Google or an iOS or whatever Apple account. So yeah, this is that general flow that we wanted to go through then. I want to show if I was to delete this file, how it would respond. So let's go ahead and do that. Our game is stopped. That is handy. Let's go into this and delete it, like so. And then we're going to run our game again. Okay, now we've run our game. Name not available. Name not. Ooh, did I get that because of the? Does it not let you use the same name when you sign in? Hold on, I may have made a little mistake with that then, in which case. Let me close down this search. Let's have a look through the log, because by that we didn't get our printout of saying that things are okay there, right? Yeah, okay. That was my mistake. Okay, so the username that we were choosing, that actually has to be unique. That was a mistake or an oversight on my part. I thought that could be different, but I guess per title, you don't want people with the same username, because the high score table could look a bit weird then, I guess, right? So I guess you could try, if that fails, you could give your player a prompt to say, hey, choose a new user ID, a new display name. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame that we would need to, when they choose a name by default, we'd need to kind of randomly generate that as well, which is, we could just use the same as the client ID perhaps, the custom ID that we made, that could work. But yeah, that was something that I wasn't 100% aware of, so apologies for that. But it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world at all. But what it tried to do, if we go into here, let me just get this back a page. So what it would have tried to do is to make a new player. But because the... Oh, did it actually make a new player? Okay. So it did make a new player still, but it just gives you an error, is it? That the username still exists, that they can't use that name? Yeah, let's track this down. We can see that like their display name here is empty, but they don't have to have a display name. So I'm glad that it didn't completely fail as a result. But yeah, so it fails at this stage. Yeah, you're completely right. So if we go into this section, it is failing here where we try and set the user title display. Because it's a new account, this will fail because it'll be like, oh, someone else has that name. So at this point, it wouldn't actually go and finish off this logic here. So you want to be careful with that, because we've hit a situation here where if it fails, we just stop. We don't do anything else, right? We don't carry on. We don't show, oh, you need to choose a username that isn't currently in use. We don't suggest the username that they typed in and add some random numbers onto it. So yeah, you'd want to probably handle that a little bit better than I have. But I'm glad we tried that, actually. It gave us a good way to realize that is this whole system of having one default username that everyone gets. Where was it? Down here. By here, this defaulto name, that isn't a sufficient way to do it. You'd need to put in either no name, make them choose a name, and then verify whether or not you're able to set the name. That's kind of what you'd need to do there. But it doesn't stop the account being created. You'd still be able to see analytically, oh, a new player has logged in. They've made an account. That's all good. It's just that one step where it tries to set the name. That doesn't get set. So yeah, that's just something to consider. But yeah, as Andre said, maybe there is a setting to allow duplicate names. That would be a good setting if you were able to do that. I guess there's probably going to be... I'll have a quick search on the internet now. So can't save duplicate display name, Playfab community. In addition to the Playfab username, titles can make use of display name, which is also a unique identifier, but specific to the title. This allows for unique names which more closely match the theme or genre of a title, for example. So yeah, effectively the title display name is, you can have a different title display name per kind of game. I think that's what it's saying there, right? But it is a unique identifier. So the display name within a title does need to be unique by the looks of it. But there we go. You learn from trying and doing, right? So you can change it, your title to allow non-unique via the settings API features as well. But please note, doing so means you won't be able to look up players by title display name in the API calls where that's an option. So it does seem like it could be possible. Let's go and have a look if we can find a way to do it, because really that would be ideal in this situation. So I was just looking here as well. Sorry if you're wondering what I was doing. So it says if you go to settings and API features, let's try and do this on screen. But where is it going to be? Is it studio settings or title settings? I'd imagine it's title settings. Let's go back here. I'll get it on the screen for you. Right, so if we go into here, users and roles, edit. No, it's not that settings, is it? I need to go into this first. Click on this cog, title info, title settings. So we go into that. Well, thank you, chat, for getting involved. It's good to solve these little hiccups, because I'm imagining for me in a game jam, it would be nice if two people had the same name. It wouldn't be the end of the world, because it saves you wasting a half hour making a little system where it pops up and says, oh, that user's already taken. That's another barrier for players, right? There we go. And we've got allow non-unique player display names. Ta-da! Alrighty. So that's all right. So let's save this. Oh, okay. Let's save this. Okay, and see if that's the right setting for us. It might be, hang on, that's player account rather than title accounts though. I might have jumped the gun on that one. Let's see what this said. Settings, API features in the Playfab game. In your title. Oh no, it's because I'm on the title. I think that'll work. I think that'll work. The Queen's English, yes please. It must default language. I don't think it was an option in the drop-down books now. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to delete this save file. So let's stop the game that was running. Stop. Let's go to our save file. Delete. And then let's try again and see if we get the same error message. Ta-da! Okay, cool. So it did allow us to have multiple usernames that time. So there we go. A little journey we've been on. First I was saying we can just call all our players defaulto. It'll be great. Then, roller coaster of emotion, we went down. It complained that the username wasn't unique. Shock, horror. However, a little bit of teamwork in the chat meant that we were able to find out that it is unique. However, you can turn it off if you want. A little bit of Googling, what did I search? By here, I typed into Google, can you set Playfab to allow duplicate names? First result gave me the answer. So it wasn't too bad to find out either, which is nice. But to be fair, it's nice to have chat here as well to kind of help guide and encourage us to find a solution rather than just going, oh, it must work that way. So that was really good. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully we've learned something new today, ladies and gentlemen. A big shout out to Rubik's, Andre, and Partly Atomic, who I've had some chats to over the past week about finding a nice way to log in without having to sign up. So yeah, they've been useful in helping me provide today's content pretty much as well. But a final reminder as well, as we draw to a close then, that if you do want to know more about the Playfab backend feature suite of features, if you want to know more about Playfab, and the general game stack of Microsoft. You can check it out using that link there. But today we've gone ahead then and we've learned how we can create a really kind of simple system for your players to log into Playfab without them knowing about it. And that's not in a sneaky way. It's more of a point of view of without them having to even think, oh, I've got to type in a username, or oh, I've got to sign up with an email and a password. And one of our main incentives to do this was to reduce the hassle and the fuss for players. And that's going to be really important for us if we're trying to get players to play our game rather than quit our game. This comes into effect massively in game jams, especially larger game jams like the Global Game Jam, where there's 100, more than 100. There might be 100 games on your site to play though, and there'll be many thousands of games made. You don't want to add a barrier to make someone decide to quit your game early and try the next game. So this allows us to have that benefit of Playfab without the cost on the user. It's a little less kind of long term, I guess, and there's a little bit more risk to it. What I mean by risk is if someone's computer got formatted, or if they somehow deleted this login save file, then there's a slight issue there that they will kind of lose their ability to log in. So that's something to consider. But as we've said, you could always convert these custom accounts and link them into real accounts where people do sign up if longevity of an account is important to you. But yeah, hopefully it's been good. Thank you everyone in chat for hanging out as well. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be chucking this into my future Game Jam projects because it's a tiny bit of code, but it just lets me know how many people have tried my Game Jam game. And when we combine it with the other things, like I can balance my game with these kind of cloud-based variables on the fly, I can see how many people are playing it. I can see that no one ever gets to level 3. Then maybe I can tweak that value on level 2 to make it that little bit easier so players do get to level 3 and people can enjoy my game a bit more, or maybe even get to the end. So yeah, it's super useful depending on what you want to do with it. But ultimately, the most simple form really would be to just make a high score table with it. I think that it's a great way to get people playing your game and competing against one another. But all right, so we are done for the day. If anyone has any questions in chat, do feel free to ask. But yeah, it's been some good chat about it throughout the stream, so thank you for that.